Welcome everyone. Today we have another new episode, and our sessions. I think that our audience definitely today enjoy. We have a session on peace, justice, and strong institute. We have Dr. William. We have Mr. Rob. We have Mr. Alex, and a few other guests. They're also joining today. So I want to start with Dr. William. How do you want to define this peace, justice, and strong institute? What's going on in USA? How do you want to share your experience with our audience?
Well, I don't know about my experience. I can start with this. At least here in the United States, it used to be peace, justice, in the American way. I'm hoping that in this new, beginning with this new year, that it's peace, justice, and the global way, because that's really, I think, how we have to look at it. I will say this, just to open up the conversation that I'm interested in hearing from my esteemed colleagues, and that is this, that books have been written. Obviously, everybody would know that there's a two-volume. Well, it should be a multi-volume set, War and Peace by Tolstoy. Conflicts have continued, will continue, and are tough to solve, particularly when you have generation over generation hurts and insults and damages and atrocities, and builds up history. Untangling that web of emotions and personal conflicts, economic conflicts, land-based conflicts is difficult. It's not to say that we shouldn't strive for it. It's not to say that we shouldn't be disappointed when we can't achieve it, because achieving it at the end of the day, sometimes, in some cases, may in fact be unrealistic. And I don't want to be a Debbie Downer here, but I do want to say this, that the process of striving for it is indeed what we ought to do. And in that regard, I will say this, that it's our institutions that provide the framework. Even when we say that our institutions break down, even when peace seems untenable, for the longest time, when I think back just right now, with peace in Ireland, for the longest time, for decades, they had open warfare with the IRA, and then with UK, the bombings were horrific. This was back in the 80s. It seemed completely intractable, and yet over time, even though there was continued conflict and atrocities and tragedies and extreme sides, people kept working at it, envoy after envoy, person after person, and sometimes they were built step by step. But today, there's a generation out there that never knew there was conflict in Ireland. Now, obviously, some places the situation is far more exacerbated, like the Middle East, and there are a variety of competing interests that we can't necessarily understand. The Middle East alone, they've been fighting for over 2,000 years. When you start talking about the continent of Africa and all of the different nations and the warring tribes and the history there, it seems insurmountable. But that's not a reason not to try. And quite frankly, it is institutions at the end of the day that will provide the framework. Now, with that in mind, the question becomes, are our current institutions providing the necessary framework, or do we have to revisit them to see whether or not they're still effective, and whether or not there can be changes in the institutions to make them more effective? That is to say, are the institutions, because having an institution in and of itself is not going to do anything. I mean, it certainly sets up a framework, but are the ones that we have either being too lackadaisical or too intractable, or simply just existing for the sake of their own existence, or are they actually trying to get to the root of the problem? So what I can tell you is that certainly War and Peace, I'm not a qualified author, and that book has already been written. I am concentrating on, I hope, the next chapter that we can write with peace, and peace, justice, and hopefully the global way. I will try, and with that, we will open up a conversation, but I'm optimistic. I just want the world to know I am fundamentally optimistic, because if not, well, why would we even bother?
Yes, thank you, Dr. William. Mr. Rob, how do you want to add to this concept specifically on peace, justice, and a strong institute?
Well, you kind of need a strong institute to deal with the problem, but at the heart of this issue worldwide is a combination of two things, or actually I should say three things. Undertraining of police forces, an increase in bias in the judicial systems, and a lack of focus on really getting rid of bias in the system and corruption. I think we when we look at the corruption report going on worldwide and see how the countries are ranked in terms of corruption, I'm really still waking up. Ranked in terms of corruption, you see an endemic problem, because if you've got corruption, you can't have justice, and if the goals are not aligned with the country, you really can't have peace. It's just about a grab of power and resources. And unless everybody has the resources that they need, you're not going to have peace. And certainly during this time of pandemic, one of the large concerns is the disparity in the distribution of the vaccines and what problems that's likely to cause economically. So finding a way to deal at a global scale with corruption, the lack of training, the lack of funding for law enforcement, and a horrible amount of bias in the various systems would be the goal of solving any of these problems. On the technology side, what we're working on is applied AI, but trying to figure out a way to deploy it, because machines aren't inherently biased and certainly aren't inherently corrupt. But if they're programmed to be corrupt or bias is introduced through their training, then you have a problem that goes from small scale to machine scale, and you'll never be able to fix it. So at the end, proper funding, a focus which addresses corruption, an understanding of the economic dynamics, and ensuring that resources are spread relatively fairly across the different ethnic groups and groups of countries is the way to really address this problem.
Thank you. Dr. Churchill, you are a politician and you are from a political background. Your grandfather was a Prime Minister of UK. So how you want to introduce today's topic, as well as what's your concept? And I wish today's session you will not come up with the different idea and different concept. Definitely all of our panelists will agree with you. Okay.
Thank you. First of all, very happy to see all these lovely faces of my good friends all around, and people that I've grown to appreciate and enjoy their erudite thoughts and their diligence in intellectual pursuit. And this is nothing more than an intellectual pursuit. In my humble mind and in my opinion, we must always recall not what my grandfather said, but what Julius Caesar said. Julius Caesar, he was very fond of a good democratic government, and he was very much a populist in the sense that he drew his power as an elector as well as a tribune from the people instead of the landed powerful people or the parties that represented the minorities. So although he was no plebeian in origin, because he had great origins, he was a man of the people. That's where we get what we call the plebiscite. So the plebs are the ones who are the vast majority of ordinary people that we have to serve when we are thinking about institutions. It is not to serve the landed gentry or the very wealthy or the aristocracy. It is the ordinary people who expect from us something extraordinary. And in this realm, in our today's world, I come to remind you that our institutions are strong mostly across the world. If anything, they are too strong for our own good, because there has to be a fine balance between the strength of institutions and the flexibility necessary in order to adjust to the difficult times, such as we are going through now, COVID and the pandemics and the loss of prestige of the democratic institutions. And we are always looking for an oligarchy. And the oligarchy can be manifest in very many different ways. Today, we have the oligarchy of the so-called science, or the scientists who claim to know everything about life, and yet they are failing us because they might think that they know a lot, except they do not know the fact that we are a republic, a democratically governed republic, and they do not care. And admittedly, I must say that in this period of these terrible lockdowns, if anything, it has been manifested that we have very strong institutions that simply do not care for the parameters that we have set for civil rights, civil society, and human rights. Case in point, any crisis, and especially this crisis, is going to be taken advantage by those who are lasting for power, for control, and who want to enforce their methods, very much like Stalin and Lenin and many others before them did. In the previous very generally accepted strong pandemic that killed a lot of people, the Spanish flu, we had a clear example of the similar type of lockdowns that existed in countries like the old Russia, who became, the Soviet system after the communists took over in 1917. And they took the excuse of this pandemic to shut down all the centers into which people found enjoyment or upliftment or spiritual quest, such as churches, synagogues, mosques, anything that would give people any other pleasure except meeting at the Communist Party hall, what so-called, at that time, the whole of the proletariats, of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, they were shut down. The churches that these awful people shut down in 1918 and beyond, they were kept closed until the year 1998 when the Soviet system collapsed. And this is what I talk about strong institutions. Who is the strong institution? The people with the guns and the people with the bullets and the badges that they pretend to care for the rest of the society, and they arbitrarily shut down the churches, but they leave the Walmarts and the temples of commerce open so we can feed our bellies but cannot feed our spirit? Who are the people who close down the mosques at the time of Eid and Ramadan? Who are these awful people who can close down the synagogues, when the rabbi is getting buried, in the funeral, like that famous rabbi in New York City, when he died, the governor shut down the place. And I consider that they've been going at it for months on end. And if they plan to keep it, for another 70, 80 years, like the communists did in old Soviet Union, well, I'll be the first one to protest against that kind of institutions, because these institutions are made up of unelected people, people who have confiscated power that does not belong to them, and people who are utilizing this crisis in order to create a new Gestapo in our lives, arresting people because they choose, to go to Christmas mass. This is what we are going to be seeing. And I know that this will not pass, especially in these United States. But I'm afraid that it is the lack of strong institutions that allows this to happen. Because even in the United States, we had a decision just on Thanksgiving Day, a decision by the Supreme Court that went against the socialist government of this Californian idiot named Gavin Newsom. He pretends to be a governor of an independent state like Cuba, and he shut down the churches. And there was a church that took this case to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court delivered a verdict that said, you cannot trust the rights of the people. The First Amendment, the first most important thing is religious freedom. How can the state impose that you close down the churches and take away the religious freedom of the people in the country that is thriving among all the nations on this earth on this very basic democratic right, the freedom to observe the God you choose to? And although the Supreme Court came down on this decision on the side of the churches in California still remain closed under the orders of this idiot governor. So I'm suggesting that perhaps, in America at least, this kind of institutions, such as the office of the governor, who is very much, out of his place in shutting down the places of faith, is to be observed as a weak institution, not as a strong institution. So I invited William.
Yes, Dr. William.
No. I was going to say, listen, isn't that the nature of the fundamental conflict between war and peace? It's which institutions are you strengthening? And Dr. Churchill, certainly you pointed out all the ways they seek to institutionalize through military and non-democratic rule those oppressive forms. But I think today we were talking about which institutions are necessary to provide a framework to strive for peace. Alex?
If I may rebut for one moment, the institution that I spoke about is the civil society. Civil society as expressed by you and I, by the NGOs, by the other organizations, the multiple facilities into which people come together to express their popular views. Thank you.
Alex, what do you got?
Yeah. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So I want to start out by saying whether it's climate related or weather related, today it's extremely, extremely cold. I feel horrible for all the homeless people in my community. I woke up this morning, there's frost, a thick, thick layer of frost on my vehicle. Donald, I don't know if you have a chance to search the temperature here in Scotts Valley. This is the coldest I've seen it all year. And I think there's a lot of people that are not prepared for how cold it was this morning. So I can see my breath, and it's so bear with me. My hands hurt really bad because it's so cold. So I want to. It's tough to have these conversations, I think, and then what we're basing off like science, what we're basing off reality, and then where we're going into opinion, because there's a lot of opinions. So sometimes opinions have the ability to spread misinformation. So in my opinion, I'm more democratic. I voted for Bernie Sanders. I was a strong supporter of Bernie Sanders and his movement because of equality, how he was training all the people in the fossil fuel industries to create new jobs, just a lot of stuff that he stood for. And I think that he had a really good perspective on equal rights and the direction he wanted to take America, similar to the United Nations and other successful democratic socialist countries around the world. So I did have a chance to go to 7 of his rallies, listen to him speak. I got there early. I got to shake his hand 2 times, and I actually had a really good conversation with his wife, Bernie Sanders' wife, year and a half, 2 years ago, because I was at one of the rallies, and I have my press credentials, and I was able to talk to her for about maybe 3 to 5 minutes. So I do
Jill
want to
is
say
a
that.
professor at the college, by the way, so she's a very educated woman.
Cool.
I met her
Yeah.
and I know her well. I count
Yeah.
Bernie Sanders as a personal friend, so I know he's very brilliant.
Yeah, brilliant person. And so without going too much into politics, we did see a drastic divide between social classes, the rich and the poor, a lot of racism, and just a lot of division between right and left, and different political and views, just different views. So I'm really thankful that we now have a new administration and a new commander in chief that will be taking office. And I hope a lot of the systemic racism and the hate and the divide that we did see in the last 4 years will be solved, because I just think it's slowing down our progress. It was also really embarrassing. I just think it was so embarrassing what happened in America. And like, to solve global warming, to solve a lot of the issues that we're working towards with technology, I just don't think there's any place for racism in our society. And thankfully now with technology, we have the ability to reach out to people around the world. And we have to understand that term that I mentioned the last broadcast, cultural relativism, just understanding where someone came from and what their lifestyle is, and the people they surround themselves with, their family, their friends, and their perspective, and just being open-minded. And then we did just mention how war is related to, of course, finite resources, but unfortunately, we are going to see more wars and conflicts in drought-stricken areas such as the Middle East, because as Earth's temperatures continue to increase, we will continue to see more heat waves, regional heat waves in the Middle East, and that will continue to displace people because of food shortages, water shortages. So I want to talk about institutions real quick. I'm very thankful that I have a wonderful community college here in Santa Cruz that has the budget that they need, really good teachers that are likely underpaid. And I am just so thankful that I have a good college. Donald went to a really good university, UCSC, which is also in Santa Cruz County. Unfortunately, that's not provided to a lot of people around the world. And as we become more technologically advanced, I'm really looking forward to having that internet, or the satellite internet, providing more internet connectivity to people around the world so they can get a good education. I eventually want to go to maybe my website. I don't know if now is the right time. I have a really good list of a lot of the organizations that I support. There's maybe like 50 or 60 of them listed there. Like the United Nations, the World Food Program, Save Our Children, UNICEF, USAID, just a lot of nonprofits that I've seen around the world when I'm traveling, when I'm helping people, Doctors Without Borders, just these people that are working for these organizations to really just make the world a better place. They really care about their job, they're genuine, and I've just seen them make a huge difference. So at some point, maybe we can pull up my website and we can see that list so other people can access them, because the more people that know that they can get careers working for a nonprofit, they can get an education, and then the training needed to work for a nonprofit, I do think that's going to be a huge factor when it comes to us just transitioning to a caring society, just redirecting more of our money, our resources, our time towards the major nonprofits and small nonprofits that are making a difference, because I think they're a lot better than most corporations. So there's some other subjects I can go into, but I'll just leave it at that, and I'll jump back in shortly.
Thank you. Professor Donald.
Hello. Hello. Good morning.
Good morning.
Nice to see you guys all again. I think that the important thing to think about right off is what exactly is an institution. And my background, as you know, is sociology, and sociologists, one of the main things that they study is institutions. So Alex was just talking about the idea of a nonprofit. So we think of the UN as an institution that does what the UN does. But what actually is the UN? I mean, is it the buildings? Is it the charter? Is it the laws, the actions that they take? The UN is an unconscious agreement that we have with each other that develops rules of action that we take in regard to them. So companies are institutions, and our governments are institutions, and our religions are institutions. All of these various kinds of things are these unconscious rules that we're following that allow us. I mean, it's so obvious. Wittgenstein had a line that I always think, which he says, "Observations which no one has doubted, but have escaped remark simply because they're always before our eyes." And I think that to really think about an institution, you have to realize that they are something that we don't really even understand quite how we're doing it. Human beings are extremely complex. And Dr. Churchill brought up a good example, which is that in California, we have very high regard for Newsom, and we're very, very, very concerned about the number of people that are getting sick, because it isn't just a matter of dying, and Dr. Churchill is happy to share his religious beliefs about that. But the truth of the matter is in a basically pluralistic society, it turns out that in the San Francisco Bay Area where I live, Christians are a minority. So white people and Christians are minority, and we're so wealthy that if the San Francisco Bay Area was its own country, it would be the 18th biggest country in the world. If it was a state, it'd be only 4 states would be larger, and one of the states that would be larger is California. So, which goes without saying. And so, having a pluralist, having a society where all religions are accepted, and not having a religion is accepted is part of our core values. And Newsom wins here, I don't know, by a lot. And we're very glad that we're having this lockdown, because our hospitals are full. The people don't just die and go to heaven like Dr. Churchill says. A lot of them get sick. Young people have been dying at an unprecedented rate. There's no time in history that as many young people have died. And it's not just something that kills off the old people and the colored people like Trump hopes. So what is government? That's back to the idea of institutions. It's something that we have. It isn't there if we don't believe it's there. If we don't have the unconscious rules that it's there, then it isn't there. So there's countries that don't have governments at all, barely, like Somalia, and we call them failed states. What's happened is the institutions have broken down. Institutions have to work on social norms, things that we all agree are what we need to do to get things done. And they can break down. You can see how much Trump has tried to break down the institutions of this country. And we're going to have to spend some time rebuilding them. The World Trade Organization is an institution where we all agree to try and have some sort of remediation if people are using trade to damage other countries. The World Health Organization, the Paris Accord are all institutions that provide are ways that we work together. So the question then gets to be is what kind of an institution will bring more peace? And since everything that we do, like an institution is basically something in our imagination. And as I've said several times before, in order for us to agree somehow we agree what abstract things are. So I can talk about the United Nations, I can talk about the World Health Organization, and I can be somewhat confident that you have a similar view, and we can talk about it. I mean, we're going to have, how we create it in head is going to be different for different people. But the way that we create it is by the information that we have available to us from other people and from the media and from our experience. But it doesn't come to us through it's not channeled to us through some mysterious force. So
I must disagree.
basically what I'm saying,
the people who killed George Floyd, they were very real. They are not imaginary. The systemically racist police in California and San Francisco you are speaking of, they're not imaginary institutions. They're very real. They use bullets. They killed people in San Jose, often almost every month, that people of color and people in San Francisco. You are glorifying a place that you consider as interesting. Gavin Newsom is not a Democrat. He's not even a person, that has any right to close down the synagogues and the mosques and the churches. I speak for the people who are suffering, because they lack the capacity to congregate. And the Supreme Court said that he should allow the churches to be open. He disregarded the most important institution of this country, the ultimate means of justice. How can you have peace without justice if you disregard the Supreme Court decision to open up the places where people can worship? I understand you don't care to worship because you worship money or something else. That's fine too. But the people who choose to worship a good God by any name they choose to, they have to be allowed to continue doing so. Otherwise, they will take arms and come out to the streets, to protest, like our Muslim brothers and sisters. They very well did in Richmond, in California, when the police tried to shut down, the mosque during Eid. 1,400, very serious, Muslim, observant, faithful people came out of that temple, that mosque, and they confronted the police, Gavin Newsom's police, who was set up for a riot. And they said, you're going to have to kill all of us before you shut down the mosque. So I suggest, my friend, you should get out a little bit more and see, and smell the roses and see what people of faith do. But that is the most important civil right that we have in this country, the right to practice any faith or no faith whatsoever. But you have
here we have religion dividing us right now.
Something. It's not Dr. Churchill.
The Supreme Court came down on Thanksgiving in directing that we should not obstruct.
Can you cut him off?
Of religion.
Okay, Dr. Churchill, please. Yes,
it's not reasonable of you. It's not reasonable. It's not reasonable of you for you to shout me down in the middle of what I'm saying. When obviously you don't understand it at all.
Of course.
What I'm saying.
Okay.
We're degrading now into a yelling match. That's not going to do anything. We're talking about
You're shouting me down. You're shouting me down in the middle of me talking. That's a reasonable way.
Okay. I just want to add a few points. according to UN, and we will discuss on that particular points. So I directly go to the UN website, and I find few facts what happening in the developing countries and around the world. Like corruptions is one of the major things. Corruption, thefts, and tax evasions cost among $1.26 trillion for developing countries per year. So we can discuss on that particular point. Birth registrations has occurred for 7.3% children, but still we need to improve. Approximately 28.5 million primary school age who are out of schools. The rule of law and development have a significant interrelations. The proportion of prisoners held in detentions. Beside that, there is a different kind of violence against children. So we can focus on that particular point. My request to our guest, if we focus on this kind of point, I think they will get a lot of interesting informations, and this session will be very much meaningful for us. Dr. William, yes.
Yes. Okay. Well, it seems to me, and I appreciate all the comments so far, and I think Rob and Alex and Donald and Dr. Churchill have all raised the essential point, and that is, if we get past the esoteric definition of institutions and what kind of institutions, I guess the question becomes, what problem are we addressing? And so in this regard, Dr. Sharif, certainly, if we're talking about the issues of exploitation of children, for example, then what that would involve discussions, it seems to me, as a reasonable starting point, how we deliver funding to them, and or how do we protect them from exploitative kinds of industries that seek to use their or abuse their labor, child labor types of agreements. And so part of that, and what I want to get to and actually ask and simply just kind of lay down at least my line in the sand, is that we would rely on those institutions, quote unquote, that we already know that are working in those areas. That is to say, that set up a framework, for example, the United Nations. And to the extent that the United Nations, at least as part of their sustainability goals, suggest that these are one of the areas that they want to focus in and target, they obviously have had these programs that have been attempting to address these. But it seems to me it's a fair question to ask whether or not they've actually been effective. I mean, do we have to build another world United Nations, which is the successor of the League of Nations? Do we have to build another one because they are ineffective? Or do we go into the United Nations and start to say, listen, let's find a coalition of the willing nations to go in and say that maybe the programs that they've been doing have been too timid. Maybe they need to be, maybe we need to exert a little bit more muscle and be more contentious and kind of lead the way using the UN as an organization. But the question becomes, and I find it a little bit interesting here on this point, and I want to defer to the rest of the group as soon as I quickly make this point, and I do emphasize quickly, and that is this, that I find it interesting that in the facts and figures that you decided that are on their own website, they cite corruption and bribery. And yet, the question has to be asked, listen, with all the resources that the United Nations currently has, and they are saying that, hey, listen, we've got these programs that address these issues of child labor and exploitation and lack of education and feeding them and health and all these other sustainability goals. It's like, well, then what are you guys doing? Can't somebody go in and take a look at their budget and say, hey, listen, not to say that it's all waste, but listen, is there a more effective way that we can use the money? So clearly the prior programs have not been effective. So let's start with an analysis, perhaps not take away any money, but start with an analysis of the money that they have been using, see if there's a more effective way that we can direct that for the problems that they've already identified, and then we can figure out how we can make it better. But perhaps more robust enforcement of and attention to the institutions that we have is the starting point. Because I, for one, think that the UN is great. I love it, and I love the goals, and I'm glad that they're there. But quite frankly, I think that they drop the ball and then they, pass responsibility when they turn around and they say, oh, we're just do-gooders and we're going to cite the problems, but we really have no control. It's like, well, you got all the money and everybody's already said, and they recognize you. Put on the blue helmets, you go in and people stop shooting. That's what the UN is for. You put on the blue helmet, put on the jacks with the white U and the white N, and people start to respect you, get to feed people. Let's make that institution more robust to attack these problems. Rob, your turn. My fault. I'm sorry.
Yes,
all right.
Mr.
So the issue with the United Nations has always been kind of a lack of authority and then the Security Council. So the lack of authority means that they can't really move into a country and operate independently. They need people, they need backing from the major countries to make that happen. And the Security Council, if it has to do with any of the countries that are on the Security Council, they tend to vote down the action. And so it goes back to fairness and equality. If you're a small country, yeah, the United Nations can step on you, but it may not step on you because of something you're doing wrong. It may step on you because the members of the Security Council want something done about you or your government. So it comes across as, on one hand, underpowered, and on the other hand, overly biased. I agree. It's the only organization that we have. We need to fix it. The UN should be an independent body that assures that the member states act appropriately, kind of like what the federal government tries to do in the United States or the European Commission tries to do with the EU. You need a certain amount of power and assurance that might doesn't make right, that anybody, regardless of their size, can be brought to heel if they're behaving badly. And right now it can't do that. And that fundamentally weakens my friend Michael Dell is the Chief Technology Officer at the UN. And they're trying to drive through a set of processes that will at least provide equality with regard to connectivity, because we've got a large number of people in the world, over a third, that aren't connected to anything. It creates a huge digital divide with regard to education, with regard to getting access to services, and with regard to just simply reporting problems. But if the UN doesn't have any strength, getting that fixed becomes a problem, because if the individual countries don't want to step up, it still doesn't get done. We can look at something like the Paris Accords. Well conceived, really good idea, and of course the U.S. exited, but it had no teeth, and so those that stayed in are not in compliance. And so the end result is if you continue to do this stuff and it looks imbalanced, it looks unfair, then people don't trust the institution, and if they don't trust the institution, they're acting outside of it, and then it can't do any good. And I think that there lies the problem. The UN needs to be stronger, it needs to be more independent, and it needs to be mission to do what's right, not just do what the powerful want done. And until we fix that, I'm not sure the UN can do what we need it to do.
Well, actually, if I
may,
no, I
go ahead.
Really quickly, Rob. Really quickly, on that point, it's simply this: that is part of. And Alex, I really want you to, because I know this is your bailiwick. It really comes into this notion that we have to really change the culture about how we're thinking about things, because for so long we've fallen into the pattern where the UN was used as a part of a proxy war during the Cold War cycle. Now that's a 70-year thing, and that was great and perhaps appropriate for the time to stop us from killing each other with nuclear weapons. But that is not the way that we ought to be looking at it right now. So we need this change in culture. I'm hopeful that Alex, your generation, will finally listen to some people like me that have been out there, alone in the woods, and you guys are actually the ones that begin to do it. Because Rob, I absolutely agree with you. We need somebody to go in and make the UN robust and more akin to perhaps the League of Nations, which was its original idea was under Wilson way back at the turn of the century, which was to make it an enforcement so that it wasn't underpowered, so that it wasn't delegitimized. But you're right, Rob. Up till now, it has been, and for perhaps it was necessary that. But now it needs an entirely different purpose, and we need people to go in and do it, Rob.
If I may add to this, I know something because I read the private letters of my grandfather. As you probably know, he was a founder of the United Nations, strong proponent of an organization that had to come to place. It was birthed after the Second World War, as you know, in San Francisco, where it was the first headquarters, because San Francisco, this beautiful city by the bay, it had the expedient capacity of looking at the Pacific, which had been foreseen to be the next great source of conflict. Mind you, at that time, Japan had just surrendered after the atomic bombs had fallen in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So when the UN came of being, it had an express purpose of being a debating body to avert the next major war. This was the point for the UN, to become a body of parley, a body of discussion, a body of debate, just kind of like what we do now, into finding a method to stop the major wars from occurring and reoccurring and reoccurring. And in that mission, I think it has served admirably, because by some calculations, it has saved us from about 37 important conflicts that you can at least put the finger and say the United Nations He served to save many, many lives in 37 different conflicts that we have established historically. And having said that, we must keep in mind that an institution has to remain focused on the business at hand. Instead, it appears to me that the United Nations try to become something for everybody, losing a sense of their own perspective to what they're best serving the world at. They chose to become everything for everybody's wishes. And I suspect that we should be considering that this type of mission creep, this loss of focus, this loss of capacity to solve the major problems that we are faced with, which still maintains to be war, uncontrolled war, and with such tremendous proliferation of nuclear weapons across the globe, obviously the United Nations is not doing its job because it's focusing on other things. I suspect that we should birth new institutions to look at the other problems that we are facing, because we have to focus on the United Nations to save us from war. And war is imminent every day.
Dr. Churchill, that's a misnomer. I mean, that's simply to say that, that the UN is so spread out that it's lost its mission, so that we therefore just need single mission institutions around the world. It just doesn't make sense, because what are we going to do? What you're essentially saying is that you're taking a corporate view that we should look at the United Nations and just break it up because it's a monopoly.
No.
And because why would I want to build another world organization to deal with child poverty when I already have the organization at the UN? And all I need the people at the UN in the child poverty division is to do their job. And that's what I need them to do. I need
But they're not.
UN to
they're
go
failing to prevent war. Look, I'm talking as part of the United States. We have something that we call the warfare state. Please pay attention to me for a moment.
I know.
The warfare state is what makes advanced economies survive. And I mean by warfare, because we exercise this continuous war mentality, producing more and more weapons that we don't need. But as you know, when you have the guns and the bullets, you will definitely use them at some point before they expire. And I mean, for ballistic weapons and everything else. So what the UN I wanted to do is to fulfill its primary mission before it expands into trying to do everything else. And the organizations that are affiliated with the UN that are very worthy, like the COP, which is the Conference of the Parties that deals with the environment, they all have to be spun off. They got started rightly. The World Education Organization, the goals, the goals for advancement and development, all of those, they have to be spun off into various independent bodies. Again, I was a big proponent of spinning off the WHO, which actually succeeded and are in the Geneva, kind of more independent, because simply the corruption that you mentioned comes in when we are failing to address the important mission and we try to exploit all the other avenues for control. So my suggestion for the UN is, if you cannot help me solve the issue of nuclear proliferation, what is the point if nobody's going to be around, after a major nuclear war, and we are only going to have the cockroaches, thriving on this earth?
Okay.
If I can,
we have our
between the two of you, you guys both are making great points. But it comes down organizationally in terms of if you're going to have mission creep, which Dr. Churchill is arguing, then you've got to fund that mission creep. I mean, William was correct that the UN is in place. It could certainly do these other jobs, but if by doing these other jobs, it degrades the capability of doing the primary mission, then you're losing the point. And so both of you are kind of right. For William,
that's what I was thinking.
Money for the UN to expand to these other missions, but it's not being funded well enough to do it. And so Dr. Churchill's right. If it's not being funded well enough to do these other missions, then maybe it should focus on its primary mission, because if it fails, we all die. So it's a case of balance. Whenever you have mission creep, you need to have funding creep that goes along with it so those missions can be successful. If the funding doesn't go up, then all you do is degrade the capability of the organization, of the institution, to do its primary job. And so maybe then you should shrink down the responsibilities. And so you've got the funding to do the missions you do have.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
I was going to say the same thing.
Yeah. Do it.
No, go. That was because I agreed with what a combination of what Dr. Churchill and William was saying, their primary mission and the importance and all of that. So really, really good point. Since we are talking about institutions, I was going to mention something about the UN from my personal perspective, but I think maybe we should also diversify our conversation for the viewers, because there's a lot of other institutions and nonprofits and other directions we can go with this conversation. Although I do definitely respect the United Nations and everything that they're doing. Sharif, do you mind pulling up my website where I have a list? I didn't have enough time to set up my laptop in front of me, and we can pull that up. I own the website Advanced Disaster Relief, and
Okay.
there's a tab.
Okay.
It's called
You can you text me in my Facebook or?
Okay, while we do that,
Okay,
Rana, I do want to
cool.
point out, and I think Dr. Churchill, I hope you will agree with me in this point, but I'm going to offer it first, and that is simply to say that that Rob's point that the UN's effectiveness has been undermined by the exclusivity of the Security Council is its biggest weakness right now, because of the Security Council and their exclusiveness in terms of throwing their weight around, not necessarily for the solution of problems, but rather for the positioning in terms of their global strategic aims, has really been what has undermined
And yet, that is also the biggest strength. It is the only body into which every day of the week, at least 5 days of the week that the UN is open, in New York City, the representatives of the biggest, most powerful countries with the plentiful nuclear weapons, they can come together and diffuse the tensions that emanate out of the daily activities of their own national leaders.
No, and
that is the most important thing. The Security Council is the most important body that we have on this earth.
No, you're right. You're right, and that's on the big.
I would never want to undermine that. That is very necessary.
That's on the big issues. But listen,
of course they have power. Of course they stop, a lot of things and actions.
But
at the same time, mind you, in the 70 years, since the existence of the United Nations, we did not have a nuclear catastrophe as of yet. So something is working.
No, and I agree, and I grant you that point, Dr. Churchill. I'm simply saying that when the Security Council starts sticking their nose into stopping programs such as child abuse and stuff, that's where the Security Council.
That's where you go to my earlier point. Let's divorce their capacity from sticking their finger on their nose and milking out the cow, which is meant to protect the children and the other privileged around the world. And that's why I say, by divorcing the Security Council, aka the leadership of the United Nations, from these programs that are vital for education and the sustenance of the poor people around the globe, then we will be doing a favor to both. Then we will divorce the corruption, and we also bring about the capacity to solve the primary problem, because we are going for a new round of war.
Dr. Churchill.
We are approaching war again. I can smell it, I can sense it, I can feel it. I don't know if you can feel it, but war is knocking on our door again, and I don't know who's going to stop it.
Okay. Alex?
All right, so we got my website.
Okay, thank you.
If you can go.
Thank you, Dr. Churchill. Alex and Dr. Donald.
Okay, thank you. Can you go to the very bottom of this page, way down? It's really far. There's a lot of information, but there's a really good list. So if you go all the way to the bottom, you'll see a whole bunch of links to some of the major nonprofits that I like supporting. So it's on that link. Just go to the very bottom of the page. If you just scroll all the way down, I got a lot of good information. So I'm very fortunate. I mean, I'll go to that list in a second. So we all have different perspectives. We're seeing things from, our life and our life choices and where we've traveled. And we all have, we're intelligent people. We have these conversations. So I think, obviously we have different views. With what Dr. Churchill was saying earlier with the churches, I think that's more off opinion and a want. And then with the people are dying, I think that's more based off reality and science.
Decision, and it's a fundamental right. The moment we start taking people's rights away, you no longer have a democracy. I'm sorry to break the news to you, sir, but it's a Supreme Court decision. It came out on Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is a holiday in America that is non-religious, and it was established by none other than our
I guess I shouldn't have said that, but the pandemic.
It is not religious, sir. It is the right of people to congregate.
I know it's
maybe do ayahuasca or take
mushrooms. I forgot that I can't.
Yeah, no, you're fine.
Okay.
Alex. Go ahead.
Okay. So
Yeah,
so
go
let's
ahead,
say
Alex.
Yes.
okay, so there's I think there's like the World Health Organization, the CDC, the things that help animals, things that help people, 360.org to take carbon dioxide out of the planet. I don't know. So my screen's small. I'm not on a computer. Can you guys see that okay? There's just a
Yes.
really good list of some of
Yes,
the
yes,
good
I
nonprofits
can
to
share.
support. Cool.
Yes, if you
So
allow me, I can. Yes.
yeah.
Why don't
So I
you
don't
find
know
out,
if
put it on the website or something?
yeah.
Yeah,
So
because it doesn't do me any good because I can't
Okay.
remember 'em.
right, I'll try to copy and paste that in the
Put
comment
the
section
link.
of
Put
this.
the link.
So-
Put the link in the chat
Cool.
window.
Yeah,
Yeah,
put the
so
link.
these are
Yeah.
okay, no problem. These are a lot of governmental and non-governmental organizations. I feel this list is refined to some of the main ones that I would either support or I think they're definitely helping make the world a better place. Some of them are focusing on cleaning up pollution. Some of them are focused on helping people, animals, environment, children, focused towards climate education and all of that. So I am fortunate that I do have my perspective, that I was contacted by an official at the United Nations, and I was invited to speak at a UN climate change conference simulation at the UN headquarters. And like 4 or 5 years ago, I went to the UN headquarters in Vienna, Austria. It was one of the 5 headquarters in the world, and it was a very interesting process with the security check, the backgrounds, getting searched, then going into this building and just seeing so many professionals, just seeing these people that all seemed like they had good intentions. They were well dressed, really well spoken, and it was just nice to see that there was no racism. As I, see the divide and all the racism, throughout California, just being a part of that, the conference, and seeing those people and networking. So I definitely support the United Nations and what they stand for. But again, I think they've, taken on too much, and that goes back to us, our responsibility of all, like similar to voting with our money. Where are we donating? Where are we spending our time? And who are we supporting? Unfortunately, this hasn't got brought up yet, but I think, correct me if I'm wrong, under the Trump administration, he pulled the United States out of the United Nations. And I think since the United States is a global superpower, I feel a lot of the funding that was going into the United Nations was from the United States. So I think that probably set the United States, the United Nations back financially and just with the support. So I do think that we should support the United Nations, rejoin or whatever we got to do with that, and also any of these other nonprofits that are important. Unfortunately, corruption is a huge problem in different places around the world. So there are branches of the United Nations that are corrupt in a lot of developing countries. And that's something that has to be addressed somehow. But it's also really challenging because when everyone's corrupt in a specific area, it's hard to get to the root of the problem. So I did see the United Nations in Ghana when I was there during the peak of the Ebola outbreak. And it just seems like they're on the front lines of a lot of wars, a lot of pandemics or potential pandemics, conflict, drought, and they're really just putting themselves out there. And after covering a lot of disasters around the world, they're usually some of the first groups or organizations to make it into areas, and they're really just risking their lives just to try to help people and make the world a better place. So I have a lot of respect for the United Nations, but again, there's they can't always address everything. So that list of other nonprofits, I think, is another place that we should direct our attention, because it's not going to just take one organization. It's going to take a lot of organizations, a lot of institutions, and again, like we mentioned above, just balance. But right now, I think that we are out of balance, and that's why we're seeing so many problems around the world. But I think it would be a solution. Nonprofits, I think, are a huge solution.
Thank you. Thank you.
If the United States
Yes.
never pulled out of the United Nations, the United States is very much part of the UN.
Are they? Okay.
Absolutely. I mean,
It's all
it would have
funding.
been
They didn't pull
unthinkable.
out.
It
Right.
has to do with some funding of the WHO, the World
Some
Health
funding.
Organization.
Yeah.
So it's a funding issue that a United States is a founding member of the United Nations.
Right.
Of course, it would never pull out of something that it had.
Oh, look at
its
what
most
Trump has
important
done that
interest.
we never
No,
thought
I
he
know,
would
I
do.
know.
He did a lot
Trump
of
is-
damage.
Sure, he's a little bit crazy, and very much a donkey. But he couldn't even do that because there are some safe hands behind him that would
Okay.
protect him from doing stupid things. However,
Yes.
at this case, what my point is that I want the United Nations to allow this dialogue. And I have participated a lot in the UN myself. I have spoken both in New York as well in Vienna. I've spoken with WHO. And personally, I always gave the same idea. Let us stay focused, because the best example of the work that the UN has done is the deterrence and the avoidance of nuclear war and very many other smaller and bigger conflicts around the world. And in that respect, they shine. The International Atomic Energy Commission, it's an offshoot of the UN. The moment they became independent, they've been doing a brilliant job because they stay focused. As I said, the World Health Organization is an offshoot of the United Nations. The moment they gain their independence, they become very successful. So I was hoping for the same thing. I want the Security Council to become perhaps an independent body, an institution into which they can maintain the integrity of the mission and let the UN devolve into these other things. But that means leadership.
Let me just say, let me offer this.
Not a bad idea.
Yes.
I might as well go.
Yeah.
No, go ahead, Donald. I mean,
Yes, Professor Uddin.
There's obviously nothing I'll be able to contribute because Dr. Churchill will not stop talking.
Donald,
Wait a minute, I get a chance too. Not
Professor
not
Uddin.
reasonable.
Yes, please continue.
Not reasonable. Panel discussions are an institution. And the norm of panel discussion is that we respectfully listen to each other and we don't shout each other down. And the norms of panel discussions are being violated here. So I'd like to point that out. Police are an institution. Countries are an institution. So if the police go around beating people up and acting like pigs, as we call them, then that's because they've developed an institution that does that. If we don't stop that, that's because we have an institution of respecting the police or allowing the police to do things in ways that are inappropriate. But the most important part of this discussion, since hopefully we'll get back to institutions, is that countries are institutions as well. I mean, a country doesn't really exist. It's something that we believe in. It exists because we believe in. And the difficulty with the UN is that the UN doesn't have sovereignty. The UN, if the UN goes into a country with military force, then it's basically invading the country. I mean, which is, many countries won't like that. And every country has institutions which are their governments. And those institutions are, in some places, incredibly corrupt. They're basically autocracies, so that their governments are almost feudal, with a single person running the government and allowing for, and corruption's endemic. I mean, you talk to people, I have a friend whose daughter lives in Mexico because she was actually born in Mexico, and he owns a hotel there. And he was talking to his daughter a little while ago, and she said she wanted to get a car, but she wasn't going to get the permission from the Mexican government, which is required. You can get pulled over and basically registering your car. And you know what she said? She said, "Oh, it's no problem. I'll just bribe them." And that's the way. So what I think Dr. Williams said about it being a culture is what I'm trying to get at. I mean, that's a word that people use, culture, the culture of, and the reason Trump can try to defund the United Nations, which he tried to do, he was certainly talking about it, but he didn't have the ability to do it, is that there are a lot of people who support him. So there, in the United States, what's developing is an autocratic institution of people, basically a cult of Trump. And how can we change these things? And I think we've said this other times in this thing, it's about education. It's about getting people to start understanding that they can have different kinds of institutions. And there's a study that says if only 3% of the people in a country take to the streets, that's enough to start changing the institutions. So the United Nations, it really just doesn't have the power. And if it did have the power, who is it that's going to decide what actions that they take? I mean, in every single solitary case, you wind up with a basically unelected committee deciding how the world is supposed to be, and that's not going to work either. So it's not just the United Nations. The institutions that we need to focus on are the institutions that we make ourselves in our own countries and own societies and our own cities and everywhere. And the only way I can see that could be changed is through education.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mr. Rob.
Well, I tend to agree that education is an endemic problem across the globe in terms of bringing people up to speed and what it is they should do. And I mean, even if we look at the election process here in the United States, if there's one thing we learned in this last election is the truth didn't matter, and that's a problem. You have to go to the heart of that, and if the population doesn't get information that is trustworthy and accurate, then they're going to reach wrong decisions, and those wrong decisions will exacerbate the problem. So I do agree. If we can get people connected, if we can get them to an equivalent education level, I mean, we've got massive problems now in the world with regard to a severe lack of skills in the technology segment. And the only way we're going to be able to address that is through education. And as we talked in our prior session, the world's going through a rather massive change in terms of technology, which is going to leave an awful lot of people unemployed. And if those people are not retrained to go into the new jobs, we're going to have serious disruptions across the world. The institutions will collapse, and perhaps they should. But when you've got nuclear weapons, the collapse of institutions could be very dire for the race. So I think fundamentally, if we want fairness, if we want equality, if we want government that serves the people and not a government that serves itself, we need to address the digital divide, get people educated, informed, and improve the quality of the information that they're getting, so that they can understand that a lot of the stuff out there is fabricated. The QAnon stuff scares the hell out of me.
Right.
But if they can't tell the difference, we're never going to fix the problem. So I do agree, education is a critical need.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mr. Alex. Yeah.
So we were just touching upon, again, misinformation, and that's, of course, caused a huge problem. I think the name of that documentary that I recently watched, that I thought it was social experiment or whatever, I think it's called Social Dilemma. It's the one on Facebook, and it talks a lot about how the Facebook algorithm, well, Facebook is one of the largest global social media connecting platforms. So if you click on something, pro-Trump or anti-this or whatever, it'll continue to show you that type of information. That's how the algorithm works. So it continues to provide you with supportive information and data and whatever you want to see. And there's enough journalists out there writing stories on everything that you can continue to see that. I think that's also continuing to, create the divide between people and groups and racism and all of that. So Facebook algorithm, we have to be concerned about that. And sometimes we might experience, like, why does this person believe that there's no climate change? It's probably because they clicked on a couple posts that were that were like climate change denying material, and then it kept showing them that type of material. Unfortunately, just the algorithms, I think, are messing stuff up. So one thing that we didn't touch on at all, I'm pretty sure the United Nations touches upon these subjects and other nonprofits, and so we haven't really talked about philosophy and ethics and morals. And I think someone in this panel talked about, well, where's the United Nations? Where are they getting their information? Who's deciding on what we're doing? Who's deciding if this is right or wrong for other countries? Unfortunately, in America, in the United States, from what I've heard from my philosophy teacher, that they don't even start teaching philosophy in middle school, grade school, high school. It's not until college or high school that you start learning about philosophy. Philosophies, is something right or wrong? I don't know. I took a philosophy course, but I don't know how to summarize it. Philosophy is really important when it comes to choosing what is best for other people in the future and making decisions. Basically, what's right and wrong. There's categories and subcategories of philosophy. So I think that if we all knew more about philosophy and all did the right thing, there would be less corruption, there'd be less racism, there would be, the police wouldn't be so violent towards people. And I think that it would just help solve a lot of issues that we're constantly talking about here. And again, that goes back to education, and because it's a branch of education and philosophy.
I have a question. Rob, I'm coming to you, and Dr. Churchill. It's because I think that you may have convinced me on this idea. But I'm going to go to Rob to play arbiter.
Okay. Sure.
And Donald, please chime in. And that is, maybe we should spin off some pieces of the United Nations. Rob, do you think that would help if we actually spun pieces off of the non-essential portions of the United Nations?
Well, I think the first step, one of the big problems we often have in industry is making decisions to address a problem before we've actually analyzed the problem. Certainly, I think that is one of the outcomes that could work. Dr. Churchill was correct. The WHO has done reasonably well as it's separated from the UN. I think it's gained more power and more influence, though I would argue that the last pandemic, it certainly underperformed at the beginning of the pandemic and created a whole series of problems we're dealing with now. But the fact of the matter is it does seem to be more effective. But we need to do causal analysis is something we don't do enough of. We need to go into the UN, figure out why it's not performing the functions that it currently has, and then define a solution that matches the problem. We shouldn't be throwing solutions at the problem until we fully understand what the cause is. And I think we're likely to find it's as big a cause, the lack of focus is as big a cause as the corruption that is inherent in the organization. And if we don't fix the corruption problem, just spinning out units, we'll just simply spread the corruption. We need to address the corruption, the sense that might makes right, and change it over to something that fully services the citizens of the world, not the oligarchs of the world. But if we don't do that first, then all we'll do is make things more complex as we spin this stuff off. It's got to be a viable organization first, and then we can consider spinning off the then viable components into independent entities that serve the purpose they were designed to serve.
Thank you. I wanted to add, as the continuum of this discussion, the most important point here. Of course, education is clearly, obviously, something I've been always helpful with since I established the Environmental Parliament, of which I'm trying still to work with Sharif and all of you to make another effort at creating an environmental parliament, not in Oxford, but on the south part of the world. On the south, meaning the global south. And I don't identify the global south as being poorer or richer or worse. I simply say, if you're going to countermand misinformation, conspiracy and craziness, including the lack of institutions, let's establish an educational institution together, namely the Environmental Parliament for the Global South, in order to produce the doctors who can go into the United Nations in 10 years or 5 years from now or 50 years, long after I'm gone, and eloquently state the case for the Global South ravages due to climate change and on and on. But what my proposal to you had been is, by creating the new doctors of the Global South through the Environmental Parliament, that's how we solve the issue of the environment and climate change. Because you have these people who are educated enough, powerful enough, coming out of a world-famous institution and advocating worthy policy. Because policy advocacy and policy delivery, they are two different things. We can advocate policy all day long, but unless you find a method of delivering that policy to the people via powerful institutions, then we will not have, what we need, the peace. Because in the future, peace would also be dependent on the climate change. There would be no justice in climate. There would be no peace, in the world. There would be no justice in economics. There would be no peace in the world. There would be no justice between North and South. There would be no peace in the world. And this is not an age-old conundrum. Yes, that is. But it is something that we are facing increasingly now because, as Alex said, water is becoming the most important resource for the future that people are fighting against each other for instead of oil. Look at Southeast Asia. The water that comes of the Mekong River has caused conflicts over the last 10,000 years. But especially now with the continuous dam building activity of China, Vietnam wants to go to war against that, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, all the countries that are downstream, that are deprived of the life-giving power of the Mekong River, They are screaming bloody murder because China is damming continuously this river. And where does the water resource come from? It comes from another acquisition of China, which is the formerly independent state of Tibet. And why is Tibet now just another appendix of China? Because they did not belong to the United Nations when they were invaded. And because they did not belong, they could not invite the United Nations to come in and help them solve their problem against the invader. So the United Nations works by invitation. They are not going to come to your house to solve a conflict until they are invited. And that is another issue that you have to be cognizant of. No nation can claim help without being invited.
I get that. And Donald, I want to come to you, but it seems to me that that's why I think that we really ought to explore. Because Dr. Churchill, I mean, you convinced me. I mean, I was all just for beefing up the UN, but if we want to break it up and spin it off, I'm all for that, because maybe that'll be the catalyst to change and to have a meaningfully mission-directed focus, so that we can actually get something done. But I'm for doing something rather than doing nothing. And frankly, I appreciate the historical portion, Dr. Churchill, but that just only goes to inform me of where we need to go. And I don't want to go back down that road. And so let's just start thinking about busting it up. Donald, what do you think about busting up the United States?
Well, it's fine with me. I don't really think that just focusing on the UN is all that useful, but it's something Dr. Churchill knows very well, so it's interesting to hear his perspective on it.
Yeah.
However, I believe, and I'm basing this on quite a lot of research. There's a book called Strategy of Conflict by Schilling. And in that book, Strategy of Conflict, he basically described the idea of mutually assured destruction. So we started aiming our missiles at each other's missiles. So what we would try and do if there was a nuclear war is blow up the other person's missiles. And right now the world is at a kind of a point that doesn't really have anything to do with the UN. There's two things. First off was the whole idea of Reagan's idea of basically having a missile shield so that they couldn't attack us. Now, if that worked, which it didn't, we would be able to attack any country in the world and not have repercussions. And right now there's a new technology, supersonic missiles, which are basically get in the country so incredibly fast that you can't stomp them under any circumstances. And both the United States, I think, is a little bit ahead on that. But the point of the matter is if any country had those and the other country didn't, then they would be able to use their supersonic missiles and wipe out the other country's ability to retaliate. And both of those cases are very destabilizing, and there's nothing that the United Nations could possibly do about it.
It's good those missiles don't work then, isn't it? The problem with
so far
hypersonic missiles is you can't turn them. And so to defend against it, all you've got to do is calculate where it's going to go, put up something it runs into, and it's going so fast it'll just, whatever you hit it with will destroy it. So it looks good with Russia because Russia actually has a working missile. But the reason the U.S. largely abandoned hypersonics was because of that problem. You cannot turn the thing at speed, and that means it can't dodge missile anti-measures. And so it looks great because it's moving really fast. But once it gets into complex airspace, all you've got to do is put something in front of it, and that'll destroy the missile. So it's not really all that effective.
Yes. Thank you for that, especially now that we have the face of the North Korean development of hypersonic ICBMs with multiple warheads. And actually, I just want to tell you, although this is secret stuff, since I know that we are just amongst ourselves, don't tell anybody, no. I can share with you that
I'll keep it to myself.
On this moment, and just keep it to yourselves, nobody in the audience should know, we had deployed both of our major fleets on a shield on the Atlantic and on the Pacific in order to protect us from the looming ICBMs, hypersonic multi-head. I'm talking for the United States, but that doesn't portend anything good for the rest of the world, because we are going to start missiles flying, blood is going to get spilled. And what I say is, when men stop talking and they run out of words, they reach for the sword. And that's why I support the UN, and I support the G5 and the G7 and the G20 and the G God knows how many, to keep on talking before we reach for the sword and we start, disemboweling each other. And this is the moment that we are going towards war. And because I know things that I cannot say, I can just tell you, it is not by an accident that we have deployed the strength of our fleets, both on the Atlantic as a shield and on the Pacific. Things are happening that we won't be none too happy about. So let us talk about how do we make peace today, because it takes a lot more work and effort, energy to make peace than go to war in a moment of anger. So I'm terribly concerned, and I want to imbue this feeling amongst you that now is the time to agitate for peace. Peace.
Well, what I can tell you, if I can be so bold, and that is simply to say that on behalf of the United States, the American people, we've already laid down our marker. We've changed an administration, and we've changed the entire cabinet, and we're putting down on the table all of our chits and saying, "Hey, this is a different ballgame." The Biden administration is looking to re-engage with Iran over the nuclear deal, to re-engage over the Paris climate accords, to essentially seek all those areas that were abandoned and or exacerbated by the failed foreign policy vision of the Trump administration. So at least I'm hopeful and I'm optimistic that America has said, hey, okay, we're back. It's clearly a much worse situation than before, but we're going to be at it, and we've got at least 4 years, and then maybe another 4 years after that. However, that does not mean, and I know that everybody keeps throwing out historical names, and so I'm just going to throw out what I think it was Thomas Jefferson, and if I have it wrong, I'm not worried, who said that, listen, maybe a democracy needs a revolution every 20 years. And since 1949 with the United Nations, that's 51, that's 71 years, maybe we need a reevaluation of what the UN needs to do. Maybe
Indeed. However, the reign of war has left the session already. It's too difficult to bring it back. I like the change. I love the change. Maybe we should have an executive for only one term, because that fish starts stinking after 3 months, not 3 or 4 years.
Fine. Then maybe what we need, because we've added so many other nations, we got to keep what's good, but we ought to go in with a capital I and say, hey, you're not working, buddy. And so maybe it's time. I mean, I'll put you on a performance improvement plan. Your division, we'll see what you can do. I mean, whatever it is that we need to do, but maybe it's a chance now that when we are reassessing our global positions, not just America and not just all the other nations, but vis-a-vis each other in terms of an enlightened engagement with each other, with a multipolar kind of powered world, that maybe we go in and we look at our institutions and we redefine.
I asked in this past month, I asked the United Nations, I made a letter to the Security Council to discuss the upcoming war, and nobody is discussing it because nobody wants to bring it, but unless a country brings it forth. But isn't this the job of the UN, to discuss the issue of the war before it becomes a war?
No, you're absolutely right, Dr. Churchill, but I might want to offer this, because I want to, and I'm not necessarily ripping a page off from Alex, although Alex, I think you'll appreciate this, but Dr. Churchill, in my prior incarnations during the course of my career and my life, I mean, I do have a background in politics, and it seems to me that maybe your letter needs other letters. Why don't you share me the list of people that you wrote to? I'll write. Alex will
I would like that very much.
No, hang on. And then we'll all write. And it's called, well, here we call it Democracy in Action. We'll just get out the vote. And so why couldn't we all just write letters to all your friends, share it with us, and then we'll all write saying, hey, listen.
In this case, you said to write to the secretary to the Secretary of the United Nations directly and tell them we would like to discuss the upcoming war plans of the United States administration, and we'd like to find a way to stop it. Let's all together put our power to do it.
And see, in Dr. Churchill, you have the perfect forum. You know why? Because
Yes.
he at the Regional Economy Forum, Sharif is blessing us with an audience of university students worldwide, with an audience worldwide, some of the brightest and best thinkers in the world. And here you have your platform, Dr. Churchill. Just share it with us. And so
I want to share an appeal for peace. So I will send you a direct email, and then we're going to share it with Sharif. We have to make an appeal for peace. Peace today. Peace against the incoming wars.
Oh, no, right. And I'm fully with it. I want to live. I don't know
Definitely. Okay.
I want to live.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, me too, by the way.
We have our other guest. Yes. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Alex. Mr. Alex and Professor Donald. Yes. What do you want to add today? Yeah.
Well, it's all well and good to appeal to peace, but the institutions that we have are sometimes not very functional, and people have their identity based in things like their country. Like people say, "I'm an American," or "I'm a Canadian," and if somebody else tries to change your country or do whatever, there's many. I use change in the general term because it may be talking about their government or the way that they do their economy, the way that they do trade, and all of those kinds of things. You're basically attacking people personally, and people have a tendency to want to lash out and defend themselves when they feel that they're being attacked. And you can feel that you're being attacked by people coming with missiles and bombs, but you can also feel attacked if people say negative things about your country. Dr. Churchill fell into a rage a couple of sessions ago because I made some comments about the United States. He said I should leave and various kinds of things. So I think that's a really good example. It's not fair. Dr. Churchill, we're having a discussion here. And if every time I try and talk, you jump in and start shouting me down, then
you
not a
can't
discussion.
be allowed to say that I suggested you leave. I love you because we make the discussion interesting. If you leave, whom am I going to pick on? Alex? He's too nice.
I can be from any country, any country, and do this, as it we can well tell here.
Oh, that's true.
Okay.
But I miss seeing you when I come down to the Bay Area. So hey, and I invited you for Christmas in my home in Seattle. Don't forget that, Donald. I like you so much. I want you to join me for Christmas.
Thank you. I read your website, and I think that one of the problems that we have in the United States is an institution of individuality, and that's what Dr. Churchill's website promotes. So obviously, it's going to be a website of somebody I think is fairly destructive, and it's part of his Senate campaign. He's trying to run for Senate.
Christmas together, There is a platform of liberty, yes, that I would agree. Democracy is very important. Democracy and liberty, they're the most important philosophical concepts that human beings came up since they came up with the age of religion. But carry on, please. I support all of those.
Well, I mean, good. And, I also want to point out that what the Supreme Court basically didn't like was that the churches were treated unequally. In other words, businesses were allowed to stay open at a certain level, but churches weren't. And so this was an unfair. Now in the new restrictions, that's being addressed so that churches are treated the same as businesses are. And that particular problem is theoretically resolved. So it's not a matter of going against the Supreme Court decision. It's a matter of understanding what the Supreme Court decision was and acting in a legal manner, which is one of the most important thing in the United States. We had a president, that was literally trying to create a coup. He was calling various states and asking them to overthrow the vote. He was doing, he was threatening people. He was threatening to withhold funds from places. And basically, he was, to this day, he thinks he won. And he's going to keep acting like he won all the way up probably to the time when they drag him out of the White House on the 20th. But our institutions proved to be strong enough that he didn't work. But if the United States continues to weaken the institutions, and the way that the institutions are being weakened is by just basically looking at that thing that I pointed out, is that institutions are unconscious things that we have to agree on. And if we get so much false information that we don't even know what the rules are anymore in our heads, they're going to start collapsing. And I'm glad to see that Facebook and Twitter are starting to ban total misinformation, at least about COVID and the political thing. But it goes back again to education. You have to be able to look at something that's on a website and be able to figure out where it came from and whether it's accurate or not. Otherwise, all the institutions are going to collapse.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you. I think Alex, he want to add some point. Yeah. Alex, unmute yourself.
We can't hear you. Unmute yourself.
Sorry, everyone. So I just wanted to remind all of us that, we have these conversations and we say things that stimulates additional input and conversation, but we do have viewers watching. So I just wanted to reach out to some of the viewers, and I wanted, because of this topic, that there's all these institutions, and this also provides a lot of volunteer opportunity with a lot of the nonprofits that you can support. That's another way to increase the quality of these institutions, what they're focused on. So if you are a good person with good intentions, you've taken a course in philosophy, you have good morals and ethics, and you want to go into a field to help make the world a better place, joining one of the nonprofits, the major nonprofits or non-governmental organizations will help us towards that transition, again, towards a caring society and sustainability. So there's volunteer opportunities, but there's also work opportunities and job opportunities. Even though they're nonprofits, you still have the ability to work for them. And there's more organizations than I think people realize. There's just so many of them. In my community, there's small ones, large ones, there's regional organizations, there's international organizations. So they vary in size and task, but anyone can participate in helping. If it's not, having a job or a career path, working for those organizations, helping them become stronger, more powerful, do more good around the world, there's usually a lot of volunteer opportunities. And if not, there's also two other options. So there's the option of donating to them so they have more financial capabilities to help more people, more capital. And then there's the other option of just like supporting them online or any other way possible. That's maybe just even going to their Facebook and, sharing one of their posts, watching some of their videos, signing one of their petitions. They work on a wide range of different things. So I just think supporting the good institutions are going to keep them strong and doing good, and then we just need to continue to not support the ones that are making less progress. And I just think that I want to add that input. So volunteering, job opportunities,
to create new ones,
and create new ones, right?
The institution is the creation of the new ones that are fit for our times.
Okay.
I mean, today we have weapons that are not being addressed by the United Nations from the original charter, like the bioweapons, which it's a separate treaty, or the START treaties, that they were not part of the UN, the limitation of nuclear weapons, that they tended to be bipolar. Now we have to include in those all the other nations that they do have nuclear capabilities, instead of just thinking America and Russia, are the only ones. Now we have to talk about, the 5 other nations that they have robust nuclear capabilities. I'm not just talking about China and North Korea, of course. And if we include those in the talks, then we bring them together into a new institution into which we can discuss things that are not part of the purview of the UN. We have to discuss biological weapons, that they are not being discussed at the United Nations level. We have to discuss EMS weapons, that they are not being discussed at the United Nations level. We have to discuss all these other things that perhaps, as I said before, when the people, the military minds, the civilian minds, they run out of words, then they reach for the sword and they start decapitating and disemboweling each other. We have to avoid just that. And that's why we need many more institutions also to give competition to the UN, because competition keeps an institution healthy, like we know in the corporate world or in the governments. We need to create some reasonable competition for the United Nations so they can become better than what they are today, because they feel that they don't have to measure themselves against anyone else. So therefore, to avoid, this difficult time for the UN and to avoid having them to go through this soul searching to clean out the corruption, they have to cut out the cancer, the parts of their body that are cancerous, B, to spin off the things that are not essential into new institutions that people can embrace, and C, to go back and focus on the most important mission that they have, that they are failing to focus on today because they are so involved in everything else. And as I said before, this situation today is a crisis, and we have the dark forces out there who take advantage of the crisis in order to further their own awful, evil means. And this is what we have to stop. And that's why when I called you, I say, help me bring 10 students. Each one of us is going to mentor one or two to create a global South environmental parliament that's going to deal with the issues of climate change in the places that are most affected, because climate change disproportionately affects the global South. My Canadian friends, they are so very happy, as well as the Russians, because they say now we have at least another 3 degrees of latitude that we can cultivate the land that was under permafrost. Canada now is going to have a lot more agricultural land that they can grow things than what they ever had before. So is Russia and Siberia. So are the Scandinavian Nordic countries. However, the global South, it loses a lot more agricultural land that becomes parched and unable to provide any agriculture because the heat is so extreme and the lack of water. So, this has to be discussed, affected, and we have to advocate good policy that then we can bring to world bodies like the Environmental Parliament, the United Nations, the Conference of the Parties, the COP, etc. We have to bring new students into the game from our following, and I propose this, and I would say 2 students for me and 2 students for each one of you. We could grow them to become Ph.D. candidates and become, doctors of the Environmental Parliament, so they can solve this problem.
From my organization, we seek help like 2 new guests, but you do not give us 2 new guests for today. Anyway, no problem. So I want to go for Dr. William.
I sent 5 people your way to come here. Then it would be a too popular window. It would be 10 of us. Then it would be impossible to talk. That's why I have to keep Sharif mindful of the need that we have to send our knowledge to the next generation, because we need more people. We are not going to be here forever.
Friends. We need few friends for Professor Donald, because
we do. Professor
Yeah.
Donald is my friend. I have exclusive tips, on Professor Donald. He's my private friend.
I can see the deep love between the 2 of you.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
It's a love thing.
Okay. Thank you. I directly want to go for the concluding remark. Just one point we want to add. Just World Talent Economy Forum. We are working with the many exclusive universities, even MIT and Stanford. We are working, even though previously I do work with Oxford University and Cambridge University. We do a lot of conference and the debate academy, and we have a plan to arrange more these intellectual things. But definitely we need more collaborations with university, like good university, because there are many youth. We want to provide them quality educations, and definitely we will share all of your contents around hundreds of million youth community. This is our target, and for that particular issues we also need a lot of volunteers, those who can help us, those who can support us, and we need good speakers like you.
I will sponsor 2 students for a doctorate. It's going to be at my expense, and they will be doctors of this exact science through the environmental parliament. In this case, it would be public health. But if any one of you
Okay.
wants to support another student, then all of a sudden we're going to have a clutch of new people who can actually change the world long after we are gone. That's how we do it the old-fashioned way.
We will support all of the good initiative if it's a good initiative.
Well, I
from
put
you.
out a call for 2 people today from our listeners to come and speak to me, and I will award them with a doctorate within a 2 years' time.
Okay. There is a MQA, like a quality
I
education
throw
systems.
down,
Yes, we have to follow the MQA.
I throw
Okay.
down the gauntlet.
I have to follow the MQA. Okay.
Okay.
Anyway, yes, we want to go for the concluding remarks. We want to start with Professor Donalds, then our honorable guest, Dr. Churchill, then Alex, then Mr. Rob, and finally Dr. William. Professor Donald.
Well, I'm just going to keep emphasizing what I've been saying, is that institutions are things that we build out of our culture and the norms of our society. So the whole effort to undermine the idea that there's global warming, which is very easy to trace to the oil companies and places like the Heartland Institute, which they fund. They have these fake scientists, Fred Singer and others, who claim to be experts but have absolutely no background in it. They trot them out on Fox News and Newsmax and things like that to say, oh, there's this huge debate, scientists don't agree, global warming, probably isn't happening, global cooling's happening, it's cold today, right? Look out where Alex is, it's cold. So there must be global cooling, right? Well, what that does is that undermines the institutions, because you're not willing to support something that is doing something that that makes no sense. Why would there be institutions to help stop global warming if global warming isn't happening? And it's the same with any institution. The police have been mentioned. If the police are actually defending us, and every time they hurt somebody, the reason that they're hurting them is because it's a bad person who's trying to hurt them, and we create this narrative, then the institution exists within the context of that narrative that we created. And those of us that are outside of the narrative and have different narratives look at what they're doing and think it's abhorrent. But on the other hand, if it's the majority of the people in the country think that's what is going on, that's what they'll do. And it's the same with the United Nations. Trump and his cult have been on and on and on about how the United Nations is a conspiracy organization that's trying to rule the world, and there's this whole global conspiracy, and that they really don't do anything, and if we let them do anything, they'd come in and take us all over and take away our guns and force everybody to have abortions or whatever kooky thing that they happen to believe. So if the United Nations could do anything that would be important, is get global connectivity so that people can have more information and figure out ways to start slowing and stopping misinformations, because people just don't, they're acting on worlds that don't exist really. And it's useful to remember that all of these things are institutions, and we focus on the United Nations. That's an institution, and there's lots of other ones that can be of that type. I mean, that's a type of institution. An NGO is a type of institution, but the police are an institution. Your country is an institution. All of these are institutions. And the only way that I can think that you step outside of that bubble of misinformation is by education. And Alex brought up philosophy. I think there's a really good book that just came out called The Passion of the Western Mind, where they do a very good summary of Western philosophy from day one, which is basically back in Heraclitus and before Plato, the pre-Socratic philosophers offered a lot, but really, basically, it started with Plato. But even if you do that, you're going to wind up with differences. Philosophy isn't a single thing where they come to a universal conclusion by a long shot. It's a description of in a way, our institutions of morality, institutions of our beliefs in reality, our institutions of science. All of these institutions can be better understood with philosophy. But the main thing is that every time I hear something that somebody tells me is a fact, I instantly don't believe them. And it drives people crazy, but the fact is they're often just saying stuff, blowing it out of their rear. And if I believe them and I repeat that, then it's my bad. And so if you have friends in other countries and you look at the perspectives of different people in the world, there's certain things that converge, like everyone sees the same thing. And you can take those things as facts. There's no facts in science, really. There's no truth. And that's all I can think of, is just let people understand what kind of institutions that they could create and work towards creating them. There's no magic formula. You can't get in there and change it. I mean, the UN can't change it because it's in people's heads, not something that you can just change. So anyway, that's
Thank you,
my
Professor
concluding
Doolin.
remark.
Yes, thank you. Dr. Churchill.
You're muted. You're muted.
I would like to allow the other guests to give their concluding remarks so I can get a full view of the thinking, and I will defer my position to Alex or William or Rob as they see please.
Okay.
Alex, I think you're up next.
Mr. Alex.
So based off this conversation, I'm sorry if I haven't been completely on point. It is really freezing out here. My car is still literally like frozen. So I didn't hear a lot of mention, or if we can focus it down to one thing, like, so there's good institutions that take us in a good direction, and then there's also damaging institutions, and then there's a lot of those. So some of the people involved in the damaging institutions may not be aware of that from, again, all of the outside sources they're getting information, and again, misinformation. So earlier, someone did mention how Facebook and Twitter now is censoring or going through and taking down some misinformation that's being spread because it caused a lot of political damage prior to Trump taking office. So Facebook, again, does have that option that I want more people to know about. If you see something that's misinformation or that you're skeptical about, I would go in and report that, so then it can be looked over by some sort of Facebook staff, and they can, what's that called? Fact check it. So I do want to mention WikiHow. So again, I've mentioned in other videos how you can type in wiki how to ride a bus, how to plant a tree, wiki how to start a community garden. You can learn a lot of stuff through WikiHow. Basically, WikiHow is a lot of professionals coming together and putting really good information that's easy to understand, easy sentences, simplified bullet points, step by step with really good illustrations. So I don't use it as often as I wish that I did, but I've seen and I've shared a lot of links through WikiHow when it has to do with like how to plant seeds or how to do basic things. So starting a nonprofit is really difficult for a lot of people, especially from what I've realized and noticed in the United States. It's a lot of steps and paperwork and staying organized, and you got to do this whole process in a systematic order, and it's pretty overwhelming for people that want to start a nonprofit. So WikiHow, and I've looked through this one, does have a really good link or information how to start a nonprofit in the United States. This may apply or be similar in the same how you would set it up in other countries around the world. So you type up wiki how to start a nonprofit, and it is very simple, bullet points, pictures, step by step. So for those that want to start a nonprofit to help make the world a better place or help with a major issue in your community, please check out that source. I'll try to go in through the comments and check that out. And again, with what Donald said, like a lot of anything that I'm saying, I try my best to provide factual information, statistics, my knowledge, my opinion to the best of my ability. But sometimes I'm like Donald, where if I hear something, I'm always trying my best to do as much research before I continue to share that information. Because again, misinformation is causing a lot of damage around the world. I wanted to again summarize that I think institutions are kind of like helping our society organize into, again, categories and subcategories. And it's just, there's a lot of good that can come out of institutions if done correctly, but then a lot of damage. So be cautious with what institutions you participate in and how you support them. And that's my concluding remark. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alex. Mr. Rob.
Well, I think at the core of the issues we're talking about really comes to a problem that we have globally with regard to doing causal analysis rather than just throwing answers to problems that haven't been defined. Alex points out a good way to get involved is to form a nonprofit, though I would argue your better first step might be to find a nonprofit that's already doing what you want to do. And then
it actually says that in the WikiHow.
Yeah, if I can give it scale. Cool. Because the issue we have, I think, right now is we've got a lot of diversity in terms of the number of nonprofits that are out there, but almost all of them are underfunded and understaffed. So that's a common problem I have, particularly with the nonprofits around me here in Bend, is there are a lot of them doing similar things, and all of them are underfunded and understaffed. And if they were just to collect themselves together, pool their resources, they could undoubtedly make a bigger difference, because an awful lot goes into waste when you build an organization, overhead, and the rest that can be spread across a number of efforts. At the end, though, if we look at really kind of changing the world, there are two things that I think should receive more focus than they're getting. One is corruption, which is widespread even in countries like ours. And the other is the lack of reliable information sources. And the polarization across the world, but particularly here, is painful because you've got two fundamentally different news sources. The left is hearing something very different than the right, and we can argue which one is the least truthful. Personally, it's the right at the moment, but the fact is there is a lack of truth on both sides. Mm-hmm. Take a look at global warming. If we were to stratify the causes, we would undoubtedly find that the beef industry here in the United States is generating a disproportionate amount of the pollution, and there are two ways to fix it: get off beef. Actually, three ways: get off beef, artificial beef, and difference in feed. You can leave the industry intact and just change the feed to address the problem. But there's such a lack of willingness to make any change for fear will damage the revenue source that we're not going to address the issue. And there lies the problem. If you want to fix something, you first have to look at the causes, then prioritize your effort against the biggest causes. But we're not about that. We're about getting elected and doing what is easy, and that needs to be fixed. So we'll really never make sustaining progress in critical issues like war, like global warming, like trafficking in humans, or even drugs, which is a whole nother area where we've totally failed at. So the one last thing is just causal analysis. Before you step into a problem, make sure your information sources are reliable and that you've looked at the cause of the problem, and then you can parse your response against the cause and put your efforts where it will do the most good.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Dr. William.
Yeah, first let me just say ditto to everything that's been said so far. It's always, you're working with professionals when you really don't have to do the heavy lifting because they've already done it. So that's just a compliment. But I will say this, just in terms of my observations and just kind of broad. Look, institutions are founded by our hopes, our dreams, and our aspirations. That's where they come from. The things that we want to see done that are better, that really reflect our better angels. Now, what they do is they function as a framework for how we think collectively we can get there. So sometimes the framework works and sometimes it doesn't. But at the end of the day, in order for them to be effective long term, we have to do and bring a honest analysis and focus in and strengthen what we find that works. Actually strengthen those areas. But then at the same time, we have to sacrifice what doesn't. And we have to be upfront about it as such that to the extent that we reevaluate and look at other places to see how we get it done. But don't forget our hopes and dreams, because that's why we're in this. And second, understand that the institutions are frameworks that can be questioned, find the ones that work, and then get rid of the ones that don't, and be helpful and hopeful as we move through the process. Because at the end of the day, what else have we got to do on this planet? I mean, I'm not trying to go into the war business or the meanness business. I'm trying to figure things out. I don't know that I can produce any more doctors, Dr. Churchill, because I'm leaving that to Sharif. He's far more qualified than I am. He's got all those institutions. But I am pleased once again and optimistic for the future, simply based on these discussions. Sharif?
Thank you, Dr. William. Basically, we are working as a team. So like this 100 million students we want to reach, it's definitely teamwork, and we need a lot of your support, because the panelists, those who are contributing, this is very important for World Talent Economy Forum. And I'm sure even you can check that many of the students, every time they are learning, they are joining, they are asking you questions, and they are learning from the discussion. That's why I'm requesting that come up with the good informations, come up with the solid informations, because example, peace, justice, and strong institution, maybe for the developing institutions, many universities, they never discuss on that particular point. But World Talent Economy Forum, we are focusing on that point, and you people are contributing. This is very, very important for millions of people, I'm sure. This kind of discussion you never find in the even media, mainstream media, electronic media, print media. I know every day many media communicate with me, but they are not taking that kind of initiative. So that is the contribution. I am sure by this way we can change many human lives, and that is the commitment of World Talent Economy Forums. All of your contributions we will distribute with the right peoples. So
I wanted to close with my last remarks, since I heard from everyone and I'm feeling myself educated, in some cases even schooled, especially when my good colleague and good friend Donald speaks to me. But I enjoy this. I enjoy the fact that we are here in the ultimate school of life, because we learn from each other. And that's what I wanted to imbue as a sense of future need. Learn from each other. And how can we best learn from each other? By engaging in discussion, by engaging in interaction, and most importantly, by reaching out to the people who hear and say there is an opportunity for an upgrade. Because the new institutions that we will need to serve our lives in the future, they have not even been created yet. The fact of the matter remains that institutions age and become dysfunctional, just like human beings are. You know, we all have a limited time. We have a beginning, we have a middle, and then we have an end. And the same thing goes for all the human creations. They come to life, and then they mature, and then they come to become fairly non-usable. So if we understand that, then we have to keep recreating new institutions with the specific means and the specific discussions of the future that will allow us to reach out and succeed in addressing the issues of the future. And that's where institutions are best, when they look forward. You cannot drive by looking in the rear view mirror, and you cannot look at the future without driving looking forward. That is why I would encourage all of us to mentor other students, people, participants, in some cases some doctors, in order to follow the ancient example of mentorship. As you know, the great universities, they started all as monasteries, and I'm speaking about the Sorbonne and Sapienza and Cambridge and Oxford, and every time there was one leading professor, rather a monk, who would take an accomplice with him, a younger person, and transport the knowledge that they had to the next generation. So I invite all of us to do the same, and for lack of a better word, this is the way of creating an institution that will live long after us if we pass on our ideas and our knowledge to the next generation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you for your contributions. World Talent Economic Forum, Asia Research and Development Institute, and Al Noor Academy. We have well-established organization in Asia Pacific. So those who want to contribute, we can make a good plans and we can contribute together. And definitely, we have to follow law, rules, and regulations of the Education Ministry. This is ultimately the objective of World Talent Economic Forum. We will follow everything.
Yes.
So, and thank you for your contributions. Monday, we have a great sessions on good health and well-being. So I want to invite today's panelists, because this panelist perhaps the best panelist, those who can come up with a different idea. Yes, there are sometimes we have some misunderstanding, but ultimately we get a very good outcomes. I'm sure
Yes.
today's audience, they really enjoyed today's session. Few of audience already said this is the great discussions. It's really good discussions, and they are observing you and they like today's discussion. Even sometimes some of our like speakers say that, okay, 2 hours of discussion is difficult, but I can give you the guarantee. Our students, our youth communities, our intellectual community, they always observe this show, and they give a very good feedback. Even today, I was in India with our honorable like Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, even Mr. Ratan Tata. I find even in India and many other places, they are really recognize World Talent Economy Forum in a good way, and they think that as a think tank we can work together and we can grow together. So I want to move long way. I really need your support, your knowledge, your experience. Your support is very important for World Talent Economy Forum. Thank you everyone for your brilliant support. Thank you for your
Thank you.
time and everything.
You're
Thank
welcome.
Thank you.
Have a happy
Yes.
holiday.
Happy holidays.
Oh, happy holiday.
God bless.
Yes, yeah.
Bye-bye.
Stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.